Okay, we are set with the live stream, so go ahead and go.
Wonderful. Good morning, everybody. Carmen Trujillo here. It is 10:04 a.m. and we will begin our special meeting regarding the superintendent evaluation tool with ASBA. And I think
Okay, we are set with the live stream, so go ahead and go.
Good morning, everybody. Carmen Trujillo. Could we all just maybe just go down the line as far as attendance, and then Miss Julie can get going?
Did you want me to go ahead and call everybody?
That would be great. I wasn't
Okay.
sure if you were on. Thank you.
Okay. Carmen Trujillo,
Here.
Jessica Bueno,
Here.
Reggie Carrillo,
Here.
Dr. Vink,
Here.
Dr. Weeks.
Present.
Wonderful. Thank you all very much.
Hi, everybody. If it pleases the president, I'll just go ahead and get started so we can get this done.
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen so you can see a PowerPoint that, well, I think I'm going to share my screen and so you can see it. There we go. Okay, there. So we'll talk today about the superintendent evaluation tool pilot that ASBA and ASA have worked together on. And I'm happy to answer any questions as we go. So just let me know if you have those. And I'm just going to get going here. So this was a partnership between ASBA and the Arizona School Administrators so that the evaluation tool had the perspective of both of those individual professionals that are involved in superintendent evaluation. We took about 9 months and worked together through Zoom over and had lots of different meetings in between during those 9 months. So I want to tell you this is the theme that we had throughout. And this is from a AA white paper evaluating the superintendent. But the quote that we kind of looked at was, no matter the specific position, evaluation needs are basic: the need for thoughtful, thorough, and fair evaluation based on performance and designed to encourage improvement in both the person being evaluated and the school district. So that was kind of our guiding principle as we went through this whole project. This is the committee, the work group that came together. Both executive directors of ASBA and ASA were involved, along with board members from across Arizona. And we tried our best to be really deliberate about having lots of different diverse kinds of districts and folks represented. So we have rural, remote, urban, suburban. We have, oh, Jessica, you had a question?
Yes, ma'am. I would like to ask if you could point out which districts are equivalent to ours.
To yours. Let's see. Well, I mean, in terms of location, we could talk about Tempe in terms of, being more urban, Tolleson a little bit more urban. Palominas is an elementary school district. So, similar, Tolleson Elementary was in there as well. So, so we tried really hard to get as many perspectives as we could. We have Union High School districts. We have elementary school districts. We have a CTED in there. We had Chevron Butte is an elementary school district, but it's a transportation district. Yes, Dr. Weeks.
Just calling out Quentin's work at Roosevelt, similar to Phoenix L.
Yes. So that was just on the board side. On the other side, with the superintendents, same kind of thing. We've got, Roosevelt, which is, very similar to your kind of demographic. Casa Grande, a little bit more rural, but still pretty suburban, becoming more and more suburban as we go along. North, south, east, west, we tried to do everything that we could to get lots of different perspectives on the committee, the work group. So today I just want to provide an overview of the tool, the creation, review some of the components of the tool, prepare you to use the tool. You won't be 100% prepared, but we'll go through everything that I can prep you for. From there, it's the board and superintendent working together to come to process and how you're going to execute the actual evaluations. Talk about best practices and common mistakes, and then answer any questions as we go. So the process, these are some of the things that we thought about as we developed this tool. Performance evaluation is statutorily required, so boards have to do it. Even if they don't like it, they have to do it. The tool should contain the standard duties of a superintendent and then allow for districts to customize the tool to meet their needs. So during the pilot, we're asking that you keep it as close to what it is right now to use the tool that we've provided. The great thing about being in the pilot is that you all get to tell us what's working and what isn't. And every pilot district will have an opportunity to complete a survey and participate in some listening sessions where some of the committee members can come together with board members who've used the tool, get their feedback, and then go forward and tweak it, figure out how we want it based on feedback, how it should look as a permanent tool. The one thing that we know is the evaluation has to meet the needs of the governing board as an accountability tool, because that's our job, right? We have to be accountable to our taxpayers, to our constituents, to our voters, and the needs of the superintendent to provide thoughtful feedback that allows for professional growth. And most importantly, gets us that student success that we're looking for. One of the things that we recognize is that the vast majority of school board members have no formal training in executing performance evaluations. So we want to include this training with the tool as we're going forward. Yes, Carmen. Did you have a question?
I was really just clapping along to the student success part.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
That's our job. Yeah, that student success, making sure that's happening. So superintendents are the only employees in the system whose evaluation is tied to the perspective and feedback of numerous individuals, acting as a single entity, because as you know, you are one. The only way that you have any power is with a quorum in a noticed meeting. So you are one group, but the superintendent has lots of different feedback and thoughts that that are shared with them that they have to manage. The process should be manageable for both the superintendent and governing board, and the evaluation tool should be used for improvement and not punitively. So we talk about at ASBA all the time using data as a flashlight, not a hammer. That's exactly how we would talk about this tool as well. Illuminating the way forward in a positive direction, not hammering someone over the head with it. So as I said before, it is Arizona law, ARS 15503, and you will see that articulated in ASBA's model policy CBI. And again, the idea of an evaluation is to make sure, one, that everyone understands what the superintendent's job is, and then how can we improve? Because that is what we're looking for, right? Continual improvement, and using the superintendent evaluation towards that goal of student achievement, student success. So a good evaluation will enhance performance, focus on goals and priorities of the district, allow for transparent measures of performance, create reasonable targets for improvement. And this one I think is really important, identifying those areas of improvement in the board superintendent relationship. What do you want this to look like? And there's a whole section, one of the standards is, one of our domains is about the board and board policy. So that's a really important part. And then provide clarity to the superintendent of the process that you're going to utilize to do the evaluation. So all of you were mailed the evaluation tool, so hopefully you have it in front of you. It's set up kind of in this way with domains being the overarching topics, then standards within each of the domains that better articulates the responsibilities of the superintendent in that domain, and the performance indicators under each standard. We really tried to keep the indicators not having overwhelming amounts of indicators. Some of these domains and standards are big areas like HR, like operations. So it was hard to kind of not have lots of indicators under those. And as we go through, you can look at, we can look together at what that looks like. So we have 6 overarching domains, and they represent kind of the buckets of the superintendent's job. Then each domain has a number of standards that describe the components of that responsibility. Carmen, you had a question.
Just for clarification, as far as the indicators, so with like 1 or 2, is that kind of what the tool, I guess what would be your recommendation? Like
No, each
percentage, a date, what exactly?
Yeah, each of those indicators is what our work group thought is a critical piece of the job. So you would complete every single indicator under each standard. And then we'll talk about how the ratings look a little bit later on.
Ooh, okay. I think
Okay.
I misunderstood, but I think I just figured out what I was thinking. So my
Okay.
apologies. Thank
All
you.
right. No problem. Okay, so those performance indicators then are in underneath the standards. And again, try to keep those as little as possible, but it's kind of hard to sum up such a big job in a few sentences or a few phrases. So that's what we ended up with. So each domain statement we have a statement under each domain that provides the overall description of the domain. And then each of the standards within that domain has an overall description of the standard, so that you have a better sense of what it is that we're looking for, what the thought process was when we were creating this. Here is the indicator, what's now called the indicator ranking scale. Yes, Carmen. Is your hand still up or am I?
No, it wasn't.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. Here, let me see if I can put that down so I can. There we go. Lower hand.
Figured
There we
out.
go. So I did too. I think we did it exactly the same time. So one of the things that we've already gotten feedback on from other pilot districts is they don't like the word ranking. They'd rather have a rating scale. So, those are things that we'll work with districts on and consider as we go forward. But we ended up with highly effective, effective, developing, and ineffective. So each of those has, in the gray area that you see here on the slide, continually exceeds the criteria, consistently meets the criteria. The developing is inconsistently or partially meets the criteria, and ineffective does not meet the criteria. So these are things that you'll look at for each indicator under each standard. And we put a kind of a definition, a descriptor below each of those rating scales, because we want you to have a sense of what the intent was. But this is also one of those things that we're recommending that boards get together, board superintendent teams come together and talk about, what does highly effective mean to this group? What does effective mean to this group? Because it could be different depending on your perspective. I'm definitely one of those people who gives out highly effective in kind of sparsely. It's just not something I hand out. And so if you have another board member who thinks doing the job is highly effective, then you have to come to some agreement about when you're going to use effective, when you're going to use highly effective. So I think that's a good thing for the board to sit down together with the superintendent. What does this mean? How will we as a group use these rating scales? Okay. So here are the domains: leadership and district culture, instructional leadership, organizational management, equity, diversity, and inclusion, communications and community relations, and board governance and policy. So those are the big buckets. Those are the 6 domains. And under each of those, we see these standards. So under leadership and district culture, we have ethics and professional norms, mission, vision, values, district culture, and innovation. So those are those are the 4 standards under leadership and district culture. Okay, I keep getting off my arrow. Okay, organizational management. Wait, did I miss one there? Yes, I did. Instructional leadership, curriculum planning and development. Again, another big area for a superintendent. Instruction and assessment and staff professional development. So that's under instructional leadership. Then organizational management, again, fiscal, operations, human resources, really big standards. So some of those have, maybe 5 or 6 different indicators in them, but the job is so big that we wanted to make sure that we were accurately reflecting what the job is. Equity, diversity, and inclusion. So that has 2 standards: the community of care and supportive students, and then systemic inclusive practices. So you'll see in this that equity and diversity and inclusion is a standalone domain, but it's also woven through, the equity piece is also woven throughout all of the standards indicators. So when we look at the human resources part, you'll see some equity issues in there. You'll see it in budget as well. Allocating resources in the way that's going to be most helpful for students. So there's different ways that we've woven the equity in there. I did have one superintendent say, "Can we take this out? Because now it's a bad word, equity." And I said, "No, we're not going there. We're keeping it right where it is." So, and then communications and community relations. So that's both internal and external communication, family engagement and support, and community engagement. And we made those differently on purpose, because family engagement and support is related to student success, right? We want to make sure that families are engaged, that they're working with the school district and the teachers and everyone there to have the best outcomes. And then community engagement are those people outside of family. So it's your business community, it's your faith community, it's all of those folks that can really be a contributor to the success of the district. And then board governance and policy. So this is one where I talked earlier about board relations. That team is incredibly important. It really sets the standard for the whole district. So if there's divisiveness or difficulty in that team, it's going to trickle down. So making sure that the board and the superintendent are on the same page is really important. Then looking at policy development and implementation. Our job as board members is to adopt policy with the help of the superintendent in terms of development of the policy. And then the implementation is really about the superintendent. And then looking at strategic goals for the school district. So this is strategic plan, strategic goals, depending on what it is that your district has, that's where you would put that information. Any questions about any of those before we? Okay. So those indicators, they're those measurable actions and behaviors that allow the board to determine the level at which the standard is being met through performance rankings or ratings. So these are the individual pieces of the job of superintendent. And so looking at that now, a lot of boards say, I don't see the superintendent in action day to day. How do I know what's going on? How do I know that this is being done? So that is about communication. It's not just at the evaluation time, it's about communication all year long. So that you're looking at the superintendents telling you the things that they're doing to engage the community. Went to this meeting with this group from the community. So that communication, I think, just happens all year long. And because we don't really see the day-to-day. We're not supposed to. And it would take up all of our times. None of us would have any ability to do any other job besides that of being a board member. So those are the things that the superintendent does, and the communication around them is really important. I think you can see in the actual tool that each indicator can also be linked to a superintendent goal for the year or a criteria identified by the board for performance pay. And we wanted to make sure that this was in there because superintendent goals sometimes seem like they're an offshoot and they're separate from the evaluation, but they really should all work in concert together. So we do have that section for the goals that we'll be talking about as well. And that would be the superintendent's, job to kind of tell you, okay, these are the ones that are related to my goal. So you can see the connection between the goals and their job, quote unquote. Okay. Here are goals. So again, we have that goals can be linked to a specific domain, standard, and indicator. Obviously, your goals should be related to and looking at your strategic plan and where you want to go and what your vision is for the future. Yes, Alicia.
Can you talk a little bit? I was just looking at the timeline and it said normally this would happen no later than December. So those goals that would be evaluated are like the prior school year's goals at that point, right?
Well, it depends on how you do it. Let me go to this. This
and
is
if now is not a good time to answer that question.
No. Yeah,
later, that's fine too.
no, we can do it now. So every district has kind of a different cycle that they follow. In my school district, the final evaluation, the summary evaluation for the year, we do in June. So we do a half yearly in January or December so that we can get, feedback on how it's going, where we are with goals. The superintendent does a self-assessment using the tool. The board comes prepared to discuss the self-assessment and their feedback on that. So what we would do is like the superintendent, depending on, and when is your cycle? What's your cycle like?
I'm not sure that we have one.
Okay. Yeah.
We typically evaluate, Julie, in October, November, after the data comes in from the state on achievement.
Okay. So you're really starting your cycle now, so now's a good time to kind of, get in on this. Some people do their final evaluation in December. So they're kind of half between. It's kind of an awkward transition for them. So if you're saying it's in November, so that's where we would say we're in the blue there, right? On this slide, you're at the year-end performance. December, January, the superintendent prepares for the upcoming evaluation cycle, meets with the board to prepare them for that, talking about goals, talking about the areas for improvement, if there are any. Then halfway through that, at least halfway through, and some superintendents are electing to do it quarterly, to sit down with the board and review the data, the tool quarterly. We feel like it has to be done at least one other time of the year before the final evaluation. So sitting down and looking at, okay, where are we at with goals? What are we doing? So November, probably somewhere May. Is that right, Larry? April, May?
We established the goals based on the prior year's data as well. So they kind of come together about the same time.
Okay. Okay, great. So if you were doing half yearly, whatever 6 months is, and then, you meet an executive session, talk about what's happening, where you are in the goals. And that's that yellow piece of the pie there. And then at the end of the year, meet for the final year-end evaluation.
I would say too, Julie, that a lot of the stuff that we talk about is an open meeting in public, specific to the data. So we'll have, we'll have budget conversations, we'll have enrollment conversations, we'll have certainly student data conversations. I call those seasonal conversations, right? Because there's a season for these things. And so they're built out in open meeting. So we don't necessarily come together, let's say mid-year, specific to the goals. The data is released when we get it to the board and the community.
Okay. All right. Any other questions about that timeline? Does that help clarify a little bit?
Sort of. I think as a board, we're gonna have to the cycle makes sense, but we're gonna have to have something more concrete for us. But so Dr. Weeks just said the data comes out kind of as it comes, but just to make sure I'm clear, you're saying that it's also suggested to then still sit down with the superintendent at least one other time in the year and look at both this tool and maybe a compilation of whatever that data was, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. And you could also, at this time you could look at, okay, what are we doing? What interventions have we made, to improve the data? So you could use that time also to just review, what the staff is doing, because we know that they're targeting their intervention. We know that they're implementing programs and practices. So that might be a good time for the superintendent to share how that's going, what they've done, what the progress has been, what needs to be changed, modified.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let's go back here a minute. So goals, I'm not going to talk to all of you about SMART goals because I know you all know what SMART goals are, but it is really important to have the time, a time bound kind of goal. It doesn't mean that it has to be done then, but it gives a target. And that's the most important part of what we want to happen, is to make sure that the board knows this is going to be done by this time. And if it's not, it's not. You have that conversation then again at that half yearly meeting. We say, I'm not meeting this goal this year. And I can give you an example from the board I serve on. One of the goals my superintendent has for this year is to bring the community together, to create cohesiveness in the community. Well, that's not going to happen this year. It's just not. We're in a very divisive time, and it's going to be difficult. So we're probably going to move that out a year to give, because he's a new superintendent. He's got to, kind of get his feet under the ground. So, we want to acknowledge what he's done in that way, but also if it hasn't happened, it's okay. We just have to, figure out when it seems reasonable that it could happen. Okay. Performance pay. So Arizona law 15341.39 enables boards to tie up to 20% of the superintendent's total annual compensation to their performance. So this is, those conditions can be easily connected to an evaluation tool by identifying the specific indicators or criteria within the domains and standards that performance pay will be based. So just depending on how you do that, whether you link it to the goals, whatever that process looks like for you, just keep that in mind as you're going through the tool. So we've gone through the evaluation cycle. And one of the things that I do think that you need to do is to sit down and say, okay, what is this going to look like? How are we going to do this? If we're doing the final evaluation in November, let's back that up 6 months. When do we meet an executive session to do a half yearly meeting on performance and goals? And then if you need touch points in between, you could set them up at that time. But I think at a minimum, making sure that you know what that's going to look like. The other thing that's really important that I don't know that boards put a lot of thought into is what's this going to look like? What is the half yearly evaluation going to look like in terms of the composition of people in the room, right? You're meeting an executive session. And I know there have been times in my board where we have asked the superintendent to leave executive session so that the board could have a conversation, then invited the superintendent back in. We also had times when we've never asked the superintendent to leave. But I think whatever you decide has to be, you need to do it every year. Because, I'm sure the year that we asked the superintendent to leave, he was like, what's this about? Why is this happening this year? And it didn't happen the last 2 years. So I think just a common understanding of the board superintendent are going to meet together. The superintendent's going to give us a summary of the work that's been done so far, progress on goals, a self-assessment of where he or she thinks they are in the evaluation tool. Then the board is going to discuss it with the superintendent, or they're going to excuse the superintendent to have a discussion. But whatever that looks like, it should be consistent year to year, so that you know what the process is. There's not any guessing about it. And everyone knows what to expect. And that, again, there's many different ways you can do this. I was in Apache Junction a few weeks ago doing this with them. They decided that they wanted to do a executive session with the superintendent, where the superintendent would provide all the information, half yearly and yearly. Then the board would go away and they'd have another executive session to provide. The board would meet, kind of consolidate all their feedback, provide one document to the superintendent on their progress, and then invite the superintendent in to provide feedback and share. So whatever that looks like, you all are the architects of that. So you need, as a group, to discuss with the superintendent and the board, what's this going to look like? How are we going to do it? And then stick to that process year to year. Unless it's not working, then obviously you have to change it.
Julie,
Yeah.
So because I think we had built in like extra time for discussion into this meeting, is that something that, since we're here and we're kind of talking about these things now, is that something that we should talk about now? Maybe what that would look like?
I mean, you can do that now if that's something. Yeah.
I'm just thinking in terms of also being efficient and getting things done. Does anyone have any thoughts on how we set up that process, or would Miss Miriam make some notes on a potential process?
I think that's a good idea, as far as maybe putting together just a proposed thing, and then we can go off of that. That would be great. Great idea, Dr. Vink.
So I guess my question then was, I think we have generally been having our executive sessions with the superintendent in the room, but it does seem like, it sounds like it would make sense to do the evaluation, to have the superintendent present, and then to have some discussion time with the board themselves. And then bring the superintendent back for any follow-up comments or whatnot.
Okay, Carmen Trujillo here. I'm sorry I misunderstood the question. Thankfully, I guess we are kind of experienced in that process a little bit here and there, but consistently, I do think that is a great structure. So that way there is some predictability of it, and we can kind of time manage those executive sessions now with a little more structure. So I think that's a great idea as well.
And then did we,
I guess I'm not understanding exactly when is this going to happen, because I don't feel like we've set up the actual like timeline. Like, so we're getting information on, okay, there's evaluations that happen half year, but we as our district haven't established how we're going to set up that timeline. So I guess that's where my question is, Dr. Vink, of where is this instance that you see happening?
yeah, that's, I think that's what I'm trying to pan out to, Jessica. I have the same kind of question. I'm wondering if in January, Julie, can you go back to the cycle thing? I'm wondering if January we kind of, whether we should start in this green area where the superintendent does a self-assessment, and we have, he would do, I think he would do that assessment on his own, and then we would schedule the meeting with the board in January in an executive session, because hopefully in January, and Julie, maybe you can chime in on this. My understanding is that best practice would be for the board to evaluate themselves and then evaluate the superintendent. So I requested at our last meeting that the board did their self-evaluation at one meeting in January. And then we would possibly be able to sit down with the superintendent and talk about his self-assessment, or since we just did the performance pay, would we start with, I mean, I'm not sure whether we would start with the year end. What are anybody's thoughts?
So when you, Dr. Weeks, do you do the performance pay and the year end at two different times of the year?
They're pretty close together. So everything happens after the ADE release of official data about student assessment, right? But the board would want to consider the calendar versus the fiscal year cycle. And so, a calendar year would be an assessment really that crosses two fiscal years, where a fiscal year cycle would be, as it stands, the fiscal year from July to June. So when the board gets to that point, to Ms. Bueno's point, determining the cycle really is driven by what the board wants to see. So for example, board elections are calendar based. So when the board, I'm hoping that this board is going to be together for a really long time, but if that's not the case, then new board members would come on in January, right? And then part of their onboarding or orientation might be part of this, right? But a board that's established that kind of together might want to consider you going through a kind of a fiscal cycle so that we could see things like enrollment for the fiscal year, budget for the fiscal year, student data for the fiscal year, those kinds of things, right? And then, of course, there's all kinds of things that happen through the course of the year, pandemic, for example, right? Things that might transcend from one fiscal year to the next. So Dr. Vink, to your point, having a kind of a thorough discussion about this, I think is in order. And I think, Julie, some examples of best practice that the board members can reflect on, I think would be helpful. And so maybe as a follow-up to this meeting, some documentation on best practice that you could email to us so that the board doesn't feel the pressure of having to do everything in one training session. There's some thoughtful room there, depending on how the board feels as a whole after the training.
I don't want to do everything, but I would like to have some sort of plan in place as we leave here today, at least to get us started. And I get the timeline, the fiscal year timeline, but I'm just wondering if we get a plan in place to start this so that you have a minute to like look through it and do a self-assessment. And that way, when we do finally get to a full assessment, we've had some time to, we've worked with it before, we've looked at it, we've gone through it. So that's kind of my concern. I don't want to, I do want us to be able to discuss it more, but I don't want to push those discussions and then end up not leaving here with some sort of plan.
So it sounds like if you stayed with the cycle that you have, November would be your year end.
Yeah.
May would be a half yearly, if you stay in that cycle. If you choose to go to the fiscal year cycle, you could do, since you've done a half year, November, you did one, but at some point you're going to have less than a year in one of these if you make that switch to the fiscal year. So again, you might want to meet, if you decided that, June 30 is going to be the time that you do the year end, you'd want to meet maybe in February or March this year, so that the final evaluation in June, you can start that new cycle. Whenever you change that, there's going to have to be time when there's either less than a year in the cycle or more than a year in the cycle. So I think it would just be up to the board to decide, what their preference is in terms of more than a year, less than a year. What cycle do you want to get on?
So how would we do it in June though, if our data doesn't usually come in until October? I guess that's kind of Dr. Weeks, is that what you were saying when you were saying fiscal cycle? Were you saying that we would end at the end of the school year?
I think the challenge all school districts have is the delay in student achievement data. It's been that way for a very long time. So if student achievement data is part of the evaluation or part of the measure, then, I guess I would lean into you, Julie. What are other school districts doing in a, let's say a fiscal year cycle when not all of the data has come in?
So what we do I didn't even say this, but I don't know if all of you know, but I'm a board member in Paradise Valley, which you probably know now. So let's not talk about Paradise Valley today. So what we do is at that half yearly evaluation is when we really look at the data that came in the fall. We're on the fiscal year cycle. So we don't, so we look at it at the half yearly. That's when we really look at that data in terms of utilizing it in the evaluation.
What month is that, Miss Julie? What month?
Usually January, December or January, depending on the schedule of, the district calendar, all of those things. We used to do it in December after the last meeting in December, and everyone just wanted to leave. So we've changed it to January because everyone's a little bit more, like, okay, got to get down to business. It's a new year. So again, it just depends on, what the will of the board and what the superintendent, what you want to do, how you want to handle that.
Miss Julie, maybe I missed this, but what was the other date or month that you guys meet?
Yeah, so we meet June
Okay.
for the final evaluation, late June, early July, then December or January.
Got it. And then as far as data coming in, does it get here by August and then we go through it and then we're ready to use it, I guess? What does the data that we wait for in the fall look like? What does that timeline look like?
I'm going to let you answer that, Larry.
So student data comes to the governing board again, seasonally, Carmen, sometime around October, right? I think this year came around the end of October when we received the information from the state in terms of student data, and that's, that is the proficient, highly proficient students and things like that, right? So there's some growth and some achievement data that comes in from the state, and we've tried. I think even the state has tried for a long time to shorten that window, but it's tough because the state assessment isn't given until the spring. So it takes them that long to get the data back. So I guess, Julie, one of the things that school districts might consider is knowing that student data comes in arrears, right? And then just to, build a contingency for that, to say, okay, well, you know what, we're going to move forward with the evaluation. There's other things on the evaluation besides student data. And so that's a component. It's a big component. But we're going to acknowledge that, this data comes in arrears. So we'll address it within the current evaluation, knowing that it's prior year student data. Do school districts consider that?
Mm-hmm.
So they just kind of go with the flow and say, okay, well, you know what, we're going to do this evaluation. And for this piece, we're just going to acknowledge that it's last year's data.
Yeah. And I think there is current year data that you can provide. I mean, I'm sure you're doing, baseline or benchmark testing throughout the year. There's, the amount of data that you could provide to the board is probably more than they want to see, or more than they have time to look at. So you could pick other data sources to look at in the process too, not just AZM2 or whatever they're calling it now. What are they calling it now? It's something different, I think.
Yeah.
Not the state exam. I'm just going to start calling it the state exam. So not just the state exam, but you could look at your benchmark testing that you're doing, your formative, your summative assessments, all of those kinds of things that are happening day to day in your school district, to get students to move ahead. So, you could also break that all down by different demographics. And there's.
We do that. Yep, we do that, Julie. And so right now we're a trimester district, but there's some very serious conversations around building a new calendar around quarterly. And so what we try to do, in fact, what we do with the governing board is for each trimester to provide that, that benchmark data.
And that's
benchmark 1, benchmark 2. And so if we go quarterly, then it would be pre-assessment benchmark 1 to 3 and 4 as we roll into the state assessment.
Does anybody have strong feelings about whether we would meet quarterly or just a half yearly? And I kind of feel like as we're getting to know this process, that quarterly would be better, but anybody else?
Well, if we're transitioning to that in our district, I would be open to that. I think anytime to get more familiar with data and budgets and what that looks like is always a plus. So if we are moving from a trimester to a quarterly district, I think that would just be a great start for all of us to just hopefully consistently be on the same page. So I'm in favor of that if that's what we're doing.
And then I see Reggie put in the chat, he doesn't have strong feelings, whatever's more efficient. So just in terms of having something, if we were to do quarterly and knowing that we just finished our year evaluation, we could start the first meeting after the superintendent's self-assessment, sometime very early in the year, maybe January, maybe late January. And then we could do a quarterly around spring break or something like that. And then the year end. Okay, so Miriam, are you taking some notes on this? Sorry. I see Jessica shaking her head, so I'm assuming we're on the same page.
And I'm taking notes as well, so I can give you
Okay.
some. some
Yeah,
feedback.
I'm taking notes as well.
Okay, beautiful. All right, well, there you go. That's, unless I do not have any other comments on scheduling. I just wanted to have something. So unless anyone else does,
No, I think it's great. That's exactly the whole, I guess, request. I think that's where it stemmed from, is looking for some sort of structure and governance that's just a little more tangible and predictable maybe. So I think it's, thank you very much, everybody, for helping us along this process.
And again, you want to talk about, do the quarterly sessions, if you're doing that, do they look the same? The superintendent presents, superintendent leaves, board discusses, superintendent comes back in, or is that just going to be an information session where you have a conversation? There's no need for the superintendent to leave because it's just a kind of another benchmark time. So thinking about that in this process also, I think, will be helpful, just in terms of expectations, so that Dr. Weeks knows what's going to happen and how it's going to happen.
for consistency, does it, I think when I asked originally, there was no one with strong feelings about having Dr. Weeks leave the room for a few minutes each time. So for consistency purposes, does it make sense to just have that be the process where he comes in, he presents, he goes out for a few minutes, whatever those minutes are, and then comes back in? Thumbs up from Jessica. Thumbs up from Carmen. Yes for Reggie. Okay, there we go. So for notes purposes, Dr. Weeks, any concerns with that process?
That process has been the standard practice for a long time. And I think it's very appropriate for boards to get what I call quiet time.
Beautiful.
And so, it doesn't deviate from what we've done in the past.
Okay, great. You guys are making good progress. Okay, so it sounds like we have the process figured out. We have the timeline figured out, which is great, because that's obviously not anything we vote on. It's just up for discussion, and you'll decide as you go through this, is quarterly too much? Maybe it will be, who knows, right? You'll just have to figure it out, give it a cycle or two. Yeah.
It's probably good for me to provide a little clarity. So when I talk about trimester versus quarterly, it's wrapped around the student benchmark assessments, right? So all of that information is provided to the governing board in open meeting, as it should, for the community to hear as well. And the strategies that schools are taking to improve. So there's been, there is that. In terms of, let's say, rolling into an executive session quarterly, if the district goes to a quarterly schedule, it won't be until the new fiscal year. So right now, from now until June, we're still on the trimester schedule, because that's the latest board adopted calendar. So the quarterly conversation really is in discussion, is in committee, and hasn't been brought to the governing board for a vote. But if it is, and it's voted and it's approved, it won't begin until the 22-23 school year.
I think it still makes sense to just get comfortable with the evaluation tool in that process, even if we're not. And then, we can discuss as we go, but now we have some sort of layout plan, something.
Okay, great. Are we ready to move on? Okay. Well, I got to get my cursor on the right screen here. I just got a new computer, so I'm still trying to figure out where the screens are. There we go. Okay. This you see in the evaluation tool that towards the end, it might be the last one or the next to last page. We have a 1-page summary document that we created because the superintendent's evaluation is the only evaluation in the system that isn't protected. It is able to be requested through Freedom of Information Act request. So we wanted to provide boards the opportunity to have a single summary document that they provide to the superintendent. I would think you would also provide this with a summary document in terms of, a paragraph. Dr. Weeks is doing well, blah, blah, blah. We want to see improvement in this area, whatever that looks like. But this was created specifically for that purpose because we wanted to make sure that entire evaluations didn't have to be released unless, of course, the superintendent and board wanted to be. That's really your call. Okay, so we're going to kind of go into best practices, and I'm not going to really spend a lot of time on this, but one of the things that we know is that not following up with employees to check on their progress is one of the big mistakes that are made in the performance evaluation cycle. So you have taken care of that. We have a cycle that you're going to be doing frequent check-ins, and that's not going to be an issue. The second thing is not wanting to hurt feelings or overrate. So evaluations place the employee in the middle of the scale, which we've effectively have done away with the scale that we have, because we've only used a 4-scale Likert instead of a 5. It is easy to kind of go in that like middle. We think this one forces you a little bit to make a choice. If you're going if you're not sure between effective and developing, you're going to have to make a choice there. And then, one of the things I think that a lot of people do, especially when you're evaluating someone, is you're looking just at most recent performance, but remembering that this whole performance is a yearly cycle of performance. So this is what we and we'll talk about this in the next one, is that halo of horn effect, where the past few weeks you just have been really dissatisfied with some of the things that have happened in the district. So everything is bad. You're not looking at the whole year. Or everything is great and you're not looking at the whole year. So just making sure that you're looking at an entire performance cycle instead of just most recent behavior. One of the things that I wanted to also talk about a little bit is this concept of data dump, where you get so much that the board has provided so much data and it's not contextualized. So it's difficult for the board to kind of wade their way through it. So that's something we'd want superintendent to be thoughtful about, giving all sorts of information that maybe aren't applicable to the goals, or will just provide too much information that it'll be hard to go through. And then there's a few other issues and a few other effects in here that are talked about. They're in the handbook that you have, so you can take a look at those as you're going through the evaluation process. The one thing I want to point out is this leniency effect, to avoid uncomfortable conversations about performance. And I think the reality is what we just have to do is be honest and kind and graceful when we're talking about things that we want to see improvement around. And that, I think, is good for both the employee and the school district. So no matter the person, again, going back to our quote that we use, no matter the person, the evaluation is designed to improve both the person being evaluated and the school district. So just keeping that in mind as you're going through. And I think that's one of the hardest things sometimes for board members, to figure out how to talk about things that they're concerned about without being too kind of vague or way too specific and direct in a way that it might hurt someone's feelings. So it's a tough needle to thread. In the evaluation handbook, you will see that there is an appendix that has an evaluation readiness checklist. So take a look at that when you have some time. We put some ample examples of evaluation. Examples of evidence for the evaluation in there as well. We hope that might help superintendents be able to decide what's going to go into the supporting documents that they're going to be bringing to the evaluation cycle. And then the third thing, the Appendix C, is just reflective questions. As board members are looking at each of the domain standards and indicators, we hope that those reflective questions will kind of spur some thought process for you as you're completing the evaluation and looking at performance. Okay, so we are at hopefully I have check marked all of these items. We still have questions. So whatever questions there still are, whatever discussion we need to have, let me know and we can take care of that now.
So Julie, the board is kind of booked out for an additional hour, and we appreciate your keeping our session open for that time. You could be kind of keeping an ear out should a board member or two have an additional question. And then my question to the board would be, would you like to have Julie kind of keep an ear out over this next hour as board has some additional conversation?
I do have some extra questions for Julie, so yes.
You are on my schedule till noon. So I am at your beck and call, whatever you need.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm thumbing through here to make sure I understand, but it says that the superintendent will provide the board member a copy of the evaluation instrument, normally no later than November 10th. So do they provide the instrument and the artifacts, or where do what's the word in there? The supporting data and documents, how do those get presented?
Well, that'll depend on how you want to do it. So for the most part, I can tell you what we do in our district. Most of that is all electronic. We just get links to, here's something that I'd like you to review for this domain or this indicator or the standard. So that can be done in that way, whatever, a week before you're going to meet, 5 days, 3 days, however you want to do it. Or some boards want to see everything in paper. So, they want that to be sent to them ahead of time. Sometimes boards just look at it that day, in the meeting. So I think, again, that's going to depend on how you want to look at it and how you want to do it. And I am going to look at your policy, because you may need to change your policy to meet this new time schedule.
Okay. Do any of our board members feel strongly about having the supporting data and documents in paper form or electronic form, or are you okay with letting Dr. Weeks decide?
Dr. Vink, it's Carmen here. I would prefer an electronic version, just to prepare ahead of time, because sometimes it's difficult to pay attention to what's going on while you're also looking at the paperwork and data and getting your questions together. So being able to be prepared for that presentation, just like a board meeting, would be great for me.
Okay, I'm seeing Reggie say digital too.
I would prefer it be digital in advance, but also like when we're in executive session, if we can have it in paper, so that way we can write our thoughts out, is my preference.
Beautiful. That makes sense, because sometimes it is hard without those things in executive session. So for January, I'm just, and Dr. Weeks, please share your feelings on this. I'm looking through, if you were to do a self-evaluation, would you be able to, would it be like a a light version? Could you do a light version of a self-evaluation? Because it's a lot of supporting data and documents, I would imagine, for a full assessment.
It probably would, Dr. Vink, only because this would be, the first run at this. And
Yeah.
so pulling data that exists and then formatting in a way that really provides for conversation.
Right. Okay. But you would be comfortable with doing some version of that in the initial self-assessment, late January type situation?
Yeah, and now just to remind the board, although it's the scheduling has become a little bit challenging, and Carmen, I'll reach out to you
Yeah.
to talk about this more, but the board had discussed a board retreat in January. And so as we kind of prioritize the resources, I am going to need to know more about what the board is looking for: self-evaluation, preparation for a retreat. And of course, we have our regular meeting with a scheduled executive session on the 27th of January. So as we kind of take a look at what January looks like, getting some direction from the governing board on which direction you all prefer. So for example, maybe drop the retreat, move into this, have it on the 27th of January so it's consistent, that kind of thing.
I agree. I think if we can take care of this first and then move into our board retreat, whether it be February or March, I'd rather just start the new year and set the tone right of how we expect this superintendent evaluation to be utilized throughout the year, would be my preference.
Okay.
Carmen Trujillo here. I agree. I didn't want to go the whole month of January, not connecting as a board before the last meeting in the month. So I think swapping, getting this process taken care of first would be best, and then plan for a retreat afterwards. So thank you for the opportunity to switch those out. I know it was kind of a great area.
And Dr. Weeks, I do appreciate your willingness to jump in with the self-evaluation. I do acknowledge that it's a significant task, but hopefully your electronic files are organized well, and it's not that cumbersome. In terms of back to the best practices board self-evaluation, I did pull the directions for ASBA for a self-evaluation, and I'll send that email over to Miriam and Dr. Weeks, just so that you have that. So we'll just need a link from Nikki for board self-evaluation, and they'll just send us a report and we can discuss that in executive session. And then from there, we can decide if in the future we want a bigger session about the board self-evaluation. And that way, Dr. Weeks, my understanding was that was, the board should not evaluate a superintendent if the board itself is not functioning well. So the idea is that we evaluate ourselves first.
Well, I think that's the goose and gander rule, right? What's good for the goose is good for the gander. And so, but you could say that across the organization. And so, but my question to you, Julie, is a board self-evaluation one of the things that the board can go into executive session to discuss?
No.
I thought so.
Well, that's
I thought it
fine.
had to be done in open meeting.
Yep.
Okay.
So I do have kind of, well, it's not really breaking news, but ASBA in the past has offered our board self-evaluation tool free with a basic report. Starting in January, we are changing that, and the detailed report will come to any board for no fee It used to be $250, but we are deciding that it's really important that boards do this work. So we want to provide that free. If you want help kind of going through the report and narrowing down some areas for improvement for the board in terms of goal development, those kinds of things, we can provide training for a fee, but the actual detailed report will no longer cost anything.
That's exciting. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, we like that.
It's always better when it's free.
So members of the board, if we were to chunk this, right, I would say to Ms. Bueno's point, chunk it in a way that we feel good about one process before we start taking on another process. So if we're going to kind of land on, a January 27th superintendent self-evaluation and conversation, then the board retreat in February or March might be where ASBA comes back for the board evaluation training. And so that could be part of it.
What the board is, so there, it's not I didn't think it was a training, but like to help us facilitate improvement. Is that what you mean? Like, but you're still suggesting we do the paper evaluation, the report, review the self-evaluation in January, and then include part of that in the retreat?
Yeah, I think it's always good to at least go over, the process, the documents that board members would fill out. There just needs to be some cornerstones set for, moving in this direction. So I don't know, it might just be a 5 or 10 minute, here you go kind of training, or ASBA may have something a little bit more thought out. And I'll bet you ASBA probably has something a little more thought out. So in terms of managing time and in terms of chunking the projects, that would be something that I would think the board might want to consider.
I'm confused. So does that mean we're not doing it in January and the board self-evaluation would come later?
It's really up to you. If you want to take a look at the superintendent's evaluation structure and tool, at the same time you look at the board self-evaluation, you certainly can.
So I was hoping that the board would evaluate themselves on it. So the way that it goes is it's a link that Nikki sends out and the board does that part on their own. And then like from home, and then ASBA sends a report. So I think I was thinking that the board would do that evaluation in January, on January 6th, prior to our voting for new officers, just in case like your self-evaluation was, something you wanted to consider before you nominated yourself for president or something like that.
Yeah, well,
and then we would do the superintendent evaluation conversation January 27th, because the conversation for the board evaluation shouldn't take that long. We're just looking at a printed report from ASBA.
that's what I thought as far as handling that part in January, but I wasn't too sure what I thought maybe our retreat would be in March or February to March. So I just got confused. My apologies.
Well, I think that brings me to question, like, what exactly is the purpose of the board evaluation? Because Dr. Vink, it seems like you are wanting it to position us in a way where we're qualified to be officers versus what is our evaluation of us being a team and conducting business for the school district. So I guess I would like some clarification on exactly what are your expectations of doing this evaluation.
Oh, no, I think my original expectation was just that we've been board members now for a year. And moving into my understanding was that it's best practice not to. I just keep connecting it to elections just because in my own head, I would want to reflect on my practice before I was nominated for something, but that's not an actual Like that's just something I'm connecting, not necessarily something that needs to drive us. But my understanding was best practice is to do a board self-evaluation prior to evaluating the superintendent. So if we're going to start like a long-term process, this would be like our initial step, and it would just be like our pilot program. And then not a pilot program, but our practice, our initial thing. And especially because it's our first year. I'm not sure I'm explaining myself well. Sorry.
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I think like you're just kind of projecting your own personal attributes and commitment to the board, but I'm just trying to understand better. This is news to me of it being best practice and doing a board evaluation. So I'm curious to see like when this information was shared about wanting to do a board evaluation before doing the superintendent's evaluation. I'm just not really connecting those dots.
I'm in Trujillo here. I remember just that being brought up generally, that if we are going to look at the superintendent, it is good to look at ourselves, but I don't remember any conversation about when. However, just hearing it now too, I do think it is a good idea, only because being on the board, this will be my 4th year and we've never done anything like that. So I'm just excited for something new process wise, but I haven't heard about it since it got brought up months ago when we were trying to decide what we were doing. So that's my small perspective of it and why I'm kind of excited about it, because it does give us maybe a small ability to make things kind of historically archived going forward with the district for when we're either long gone or I'm not sure really, but that I do remember it being brought up months ago, but I haven't heard about it also right now. But I do think leadership wise, it is good for us to do it that way. It's, I don't know, kind of a leading by example thing. So that's at least my interpretation of it. So however the rest of the board would like to decide when it happens, I'm good with whenever it happens. I just know that if we're asking it from our superintendent, it's great for us to do the same. So when it happens, I'm not really concerned. I just wanted clarification on when, because I was getting confused that we were switching things. Thank you.
Julie, have you conducted a self-evaluation as a board, and if so, what does that look like? Because I'm thinking does it, and then the other question is, how much does it align with the superintendent board evaluation? I'm thinking probably not too much, just because if we're gonna do evaluation on superintendent, I think it's just, the pros would be to put ourselves, just to understand like what the superintendent's going through, but also just being publicly elected officials, it's that we do have an evaluation conducted by the people. And so that's just what I'm thinking too, but.
Yeah. So board self-evaluation is in policy, but it's not required by statute. So your policy probably says that you should be doing it. I haven't looked directly at your policy, so I can't be 100% certain about that. But my board does a self-evaluation every year. We do it in June, right around the same time we're doing the superintendent's evaluation, so that we can kind of identify, is the board functioning in a way that is giving the superintendent the ability to perform well? Because if you have if you've got a board that's split, it's hard for the superintendent to make everyone happy. So what's the board doing to, look at their own professionalism, look at how they're working together as a team? So I do think that there is some pretty good evidence that that the board being introspective about their practice helps the superintendent be successful. I think the other thing is that the tool that we use is research-based. It's not something that we just kind of came up with. Washington State, their School Boards Association has been working on this for years and years and years. They work with some professors out of the University of Washington and I think Idaho. So this is a pretty well vetted tool that we provide. So would it help if I kind of had you look at what it looks like so that you could have a visual on, what you're going to be doing? I can kind of just share a generic report with you just so you can see exactly what it will look like and how it functions. If so, is that something you'd like? Okay, so let me share my screen really quickly. I'm going to try to do it quickly.
You've zoomed right through everything, so I was nervous it was going to take a lot longer. So
we're doing good on time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the aggregate data that comes out. The evaluation tool has 5 different standards or pillars. The first one is conduct and ethics. The second one is vision. The third one is structure. The fourth one is accountability. And the fifth is advocacy. So those are the 5. Is that easy? Do you need to have that? Does it need to be?
Maybe make it as wide as the screen, Julie.
Yeah, let me see what I can do to get this better.
I think if you go to Zoom.
Where does it say Zoom, Larry?
Let's see, what program are you in? Microsoft
This
Word?
is online. Yeah. The problem is it's online. So,
So there's no view, Zoom feature.
Here, I'm going to open it in the desktop app. That'll probably help us a little bit more.
Just usually hold the control button and then scroll on my mouse, but my kids don't have a mouse like mine, so it might not work.
Okay, I think it's going to open here. Let me get this larger. Is that better? So here is, can you see this now? Is it a little bit bigger? Okay. So here's each of the standards, and this page is the report that the not detailed report. God, I don't even know what we call it. The summary report. So this has you look at how you're doing in each of those pillars, just in general. And then as you go through, it's broken down by benchmarks in terms of questions. So you can see benchmark success. A is conducting board and district business in fair, respectful, and responsible manner. And then you answer the question, to what extent does our board base its decisions on the best for student success? And then you answer it and you get a summary, just like this one, of where everyone thinks you're at. So for every single question, you'll get an idea of where everyone is. So some of these, this first one, let's just look at this one. 3, 4, I mean, always, most of the time, pretty good. Is this don't know because you have a new board member? Is it don't know because you feel like it hasn't been explained as a board member, or you don't know how to articulate that? So having conversation about that. So in just going through each of the standards. So this one is the board's accountable and open to the public, seeking divergent opinions. And you can see here, this board, whoever this was, I don't even know who it was, carry out annual assessments of its performance. 3 people are like, we don't ever do that. Okay, so that's something to think about, right? When you see the red, when you see the yellow, you're kind of like, okay, this is maybe something we should pay attention to. And so you just go through the whole thing like this. There's about 69 questions that will give you data on it. And this is the report that you get. This is exactly what you would receive. So by each standard, by each benchmark, and then by each question, how everyone answered.
So Julie, then in open meeting, the board would go through this entire report and then have a conversation about
where you want to focus. Yeah.
and then to establish board-specific goals to mitigate weaknesses and perpetuate the strengths. That sounds an awful lot like it's going to take more than 15 minutes to
Well, so here's the thing. This is a data-rich document. So it does take some time to go through. And when we do, we have two different trainings that we do on this. Part one is going through this document and kind of narrowing down with helping you narrow down as a board what you want to focus on to develop goals around and where you want to look for improvement. The second training is to develop the goals. Some boards do that on their own, right? So part one is 2 to 3 hours, somewhere in that vicinity. Part two, again, 2 to 3 hours if you decide to engage us to help you write goals. But again, you don't have to do that. I mean, that's up to you how you want to manage that. So it is a lot of data. It is a lot of data to look at. It's a lot of data. We ask you to talk about strengths and opportunities for improvement. We have a system where we narrow it down. We've got a poster, the whole, so we can get through it usually pretty well. And a lot of times there are ones that really stick out. So there's no question you have to deal with it. This one, again, take responsibility for the orientation of new board members. This one, clearly, some of the time. Well, that's not a some of the time job. You're either doing it with every new board member or you're not doing it with every new board member, right? So that's one that this board may have said, okay, this is something we got to figure out. Let me see another one. This is about strategic plan and district vision. And sometimes there aren't any that really jump out.
Julie, when your board in Paradise Valley does this self-evaluation, then how does the discussion in the meeting go? You do present the whole thing or you present the highlights? Like what does that, because I mean, your training is 2 to 3 hours, but you're not spending 2 to 3 hours in your board meeting with this.
No, this was something we would do during a retreat. We wouldn't do it during a board meeting. But a retreat, which is
the self-evaluation, so you do your self-evaluation in a retreat? Is that what you're saying?
We would review it in a study session or a retreat, which of course is open to the public. I mean, every meeting where there's a quorum of you, it's open to the public. So this is not something I would recommend you do in a regular board meeting because it's pretty chunky. It's a lot of information. Now, I would recommend that once you go through this document and you come up with some board goals or some areas that you want to focus on, you do talk about it in a meeting. That I think is important that the public knows we're looking at our performance. We're doing, we're self-assessing as well. And, I think one of the things it is impactful is sometimes for employees to know, hey, the board is holding themselves accountable too. So they're doing an evaluation, they're evaluating the superintendent, I'm being evaluated, it's just the whole system-wide kind of continuous improvement model.
Okay, so then I guess let's go back to the timeline that we had kind of discussed for our specific board, and in terms of best practices and how we get this done. If we wanted to self-evaluate before evaluating the superintendent, but I appreciate you sharing that with us. I did not realize that it was something you were recommending to be done in a study session. So if we wanted to start January off with the superintendent's participating in this pre-assessment, but we also wanted to do the board, then would we, since Carmen had already talked about potentially having a board retreat or a study session, would we do that in January and then do the January 27th?
So from what I'm hearing, this process seems pretty, not big, but definitely something that's gonna add value to the board. So I guess that in a perfect world, that's kind of what my hope originally was. Or as far as January, I felt like going a whole month and just wait, having a real meeting at the end of the month wasn't the most productive for, I don't know, I just felt like we should just keep some space open for it. So what that looks like, I really hadn't made any humongous. It was just a thought. So whatever the board would like to do in that interim time, I think would be good. But this thing sounds like it could be a really great part of our retreat. So I'm not really too sure what that looks like, but 2 to 3 hours, it kind of seems like we should. Well, really, I guess since we were kind of thinking on one agency already for our retreat, I would be open to switching that to ASBA to handle for if we wanted to implement this process. But I'm not too sure what that looks like time-wise, like how much time ASBA needs to collect all that data, go through it, and then get it back to us. If that might just kind of throw a wrench in what we had going on in January. So,
Well, as long as you all do it in the time frame that we select, it's not hard to get you the report. What is typically hard about this is chasing after board members to actually do it.
Yeah.
And board members and the superintendent take this evaluation, this self-evaluation. So that the actual report, as long as I have 30, as long as Nikki has 24 to 36 hours, we can pull the report pretty quickly. But again, the challenge is always, which board, and it's done anonymously. So you don't know who's done it. So you're always with the board secretary, like, could you tell everyone to do it? And some board members like, I already did it. And then so that's the challenge.
well,
I was gonna say my concern is just timing. I know that we had set it up for January. We're talking about it now, and it's just I don't want to kind of pack on too much for the upcoming school year. We're talking about this whole new process with the superintendent evaluation, and then we're talking about a board evaluation, and that's something we're preparing for right now. And I'll defer to Dr. Weeks in a bit about whether we have time to plan for this. And honestly, it's not top of my concern right now to implement this in January. Again, I agree with President Trujillo's point, is it would add value. It's just, again, talking about timing and first figuring out our schedule and what our work study sessions look like. And maybe this is something we put off for later on in the year, or something we put off for the 23-24 school year.
So just a couple of things. Thank you, Reggie. Thank you, members of the board. Julie, we're kind of floating outside the scope of our training today. Spending ample time talking about the board evaluation was not part of the original agenda. So we want to make sure we stay on topic. The other thing is that before we move to this kind of change for the governing board, we need to recognize that there's a lot of boards who don't use the self-evaluation tool. And it would be good to conduct some research to determine the strengths and weaknesses wrapped around any board evaluation tool. So for example, I agree with you, Reggie, that maybe we don't want to put too much in our 5-pound bag here in the moment, but to really maybe spend a little bit more time being thoughtful and intentional and really understanding the value that the community in this district derives from a board evaluation tool. So in as much as I think what's good for one is good for another, when we're talking in the context of the superintendent's evaluation at the same time, you made a good point, Reggie, and that is that if board members were not doing a good job, the community would let you know. And I think there's some value to that reflection. So those are my 2 points. Of course, the board is free to do whatever you think is best. I would say in the context of student success, the district as a whole, and the community, what value does this, what value does all of this have for these groups? And maybe that's a time when a different conversation should take place, and perhaps even a vote to determine whether or not a board evaluation should be embedded into the culture of the board. Because then, you would want to transfer this culture to the next board and to the next board and to the next board after that. And of course, the next board may not want an evaluation. Maybe they just cancel it. So anyway, lots to think about. And maybe some future discussion would be helpful.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with Reggie. I don't really see this being a priority, especially since we are missing one person. I just feel like it wouldn't be as beneficial if, us four did the evaluation without, Dr. Diaz here with us. And, she's been gone for about 4 months. So I just don't understand how important and rushed that this tool needs to be utilized when we just haven't been collectively a team for a year. So I agree with Reggie. I just think that this is just not a priority at this time.
Carmen Trujillo, I am more concerned about deciding when we actually will have time to come to a decision on a tool and then implement it. Hold on, please.
I think in terms of this meeting and superintendent evaluation, we have a plan in place, and that is good. I'm going to go back and look at the meeting minutes, read the board evaluation. I do remember it being brought up somewhere in there, but that's fine. I do appreciate Ms. Bueno's points in evaluating the team as a whole. That does make sense to me with Alora having been out. So thank you for pointing that out. But I think, and Miriam, you can chime in regards to the notes. I think we have a plan for going forward with the superintendent's evaluation starting in January with a self-evaluation conversation.
Yeah, I did take notes about the process and the time that you're looking at.
Okay, so that's good work. I'm someone who likes to get a lot of things planned, but I feel good about getting this one piece planned, and I appreciate some of the reining in for all the other pieces.
As far as I'm concerned, I'm done. I will send a summary kind of what we talked about to Dr. Weeks and Miriam, and you can get it out to the board whenever you want. Throughout this process of the pilot, I'm available for consultation, board members or superintendent. Dr. Weeks, we also have some superintendents who were on the committee who are available to consult with superintendents about the tool. If there's something that you want, just let me know if you want to do that, and I'll get you connected with one of them.
That sounds great, Julie. Thank you very much. Looks like President Trujillo had to step away for just a second. She'll be back. And in lieu of that, I'll call it that awkward silence. Are there any additional thoughts, concerns, or questions? My understanding of the next step is to prepare a self-evaluation for an executive session on January 27th. And then to continue to collaborate with you all as we design and build this model and the scheduling that goes along with it.
The one thing Larry, that I would remind you, and you probably have this down as a note, but to look at your policy CBI, since you've changed kind of dates of that, to kind of look at what it says, because it does say November right now and by December 18th. So just taking a look at that and maybe just bringing it back to the board to approve for the new timeline you've identified.
Yeah, that's a good catch, Julie. We could probably do that on the 27th as well. At least a first read. That brings, that signals that we're all on the same page in terms of calendaring.
Sorry, I'm just now jumping back. I had an issue I had to run away for, but can I ask maybe for a small summary of what I missed in the last minute or two?
We're just kind of winding down, Carmen, and Julie mentioned that there might be a slight policy change in policy CBI to align with the kind of the scheduling, the annualized scheduling versus the schedule that exists in policy now in terms of superintendent's evaluation. So if we're talking about, to Dr. Vink's point, being efficient, trying to get as much done, in a single meeting, this is kind of low hanging fruit. And we'll bring a policy revision, either first read or first and second read at the January 27th meeting.
And that's regarding the
calendaring of the superintendent's evaluation. Because right now it says November, but if we're going to go to January, then we need to say that in policy.
Got it. What was the December 18th date?
That's, let me just look at it real quick. Let's see. It says that the superintendent shall provide each member of the board a copy of the superintendent evaluation no later than November 10th. And the board president shall schedule a meeting not later than December 18th, when the board will devote an executive session to the evaluation of the superintendent's performance. So, I mean, you could make that way more generalized if you wanted to, by saying, we'll do an annual evaluation in the summer. We could do, a half yearly or quarterly, throughout the year. That's really specific, which is fine if that's how you want it, but
Right. No,
it just
that's
kind
our
of
focus.
have you in a little bit.
Yeah, at least have a discussion about what we want. That's actually like the goal. So that we were all on the same page. So I appreciate that, because we're always wanting to get dates on the calendar. So at what point, Dr. Weeks, I guess, what is our plan for January then? Are we deciding on a policy, deciding on a process, deciding on a tool? Where do we go from here? What have we come up with, and what do we see for the January 2022 calendar?
So I think what we can do is on the 6th of January, we want to elect officers. And that traditionally that's that, and set the calendar, the board calendar for the year. Is typically what we do at the January 6th, the first meeting in January, right? It's really focused on the governing board, celebrating kind of the kickoff of the year and whatnot.
Right, but pertaining to this conversation, what does that look like in
What we
January?
could do is we can bring the policy revision first read to the board at the January 6th meeting as an additional item. And then at the 27th executive session, we can preface this perhaps with a receive and discuss, to let the community know that we're moving in this direction, that we're part of the, we're part of the ASBA pilot program to establish an evaluation tool for the superintendent, and for the remainder of the year, we'll be working on that. What do you think about that, Julie?
Yeah, I think that sounds good.
I had one more question while we still have a little bit of time. You mentioned earlier, as far as asking board members to keep the tool as boilerplate-ish as possible. At least that was my interpretation of it. If we did make any changes to it, not that I have any in my head, but what does that process look like? Do we email you? Do we ask questions as far as this being, I'm assuming it's a Word doc we could use or not use? What does that process look like?
Again, for the pilot, we really would like you to keep it as close to what it is as possible. So you could add things. And that's the other thing, even when this is not a pilot tool, what we believe, what the work group believes is this really represents the job of the superintendent. That taking any part of this out of there is really taking the part of the superintendent's job away. So we really probably will never advocate for people to be able to remove things, but we certainly understand that you want to add things. There may be things that you want to add. There may be indicators you want to add. The other thing that I didn't cover that I should have was, if you look on the tool, you'll see that the domains have the ability for you to assign a percentage to it.
Yeah.
So we did that because we know that there's sometimes that boards want to focus more on one particular item than another. So a couple of examples: communication and community relations. Sometimes boards are like, we really have to get a communications plan. We need to figure out how we're going to communicate with internal, external stakeholders. So you might weigh that percentage-wise a little bit higher one year than you might the next year. Or you have a new superintendent, and that board relations and policy development is really important, to get you all off on the right foot. Maybe that one is a little bit heavier in terms of percentage one year than another. So that is another way that we wanted to provide the ability to customize the tool, to give, and that's something that we're not telling you in the pilot what that looks like. That's your decision.
Just wondering, not that there's anything that I foresee. I feel like it's a really great, well thought out tool. I just wasn't sure if that was, there was a process we needed to have in mind in case any board members were thinking about that. So I appreciate it. So I guess our next discussion about this would be at the January 27th meeting. And then are we thinking we won't have a retreat anymore in the middle of the month, Dr. Weeks?
It's probably best to focus on the things that, we discussed here today. If the governing board, and here's another question for you, Julie, does the governing board need to vote to adopt the tool?
I would imagine so.
I don't know that you specifically have to adopt the tool, but I do think it would be a good idea to at least have discussion about it in a meeting, and what the tool looks like. There's nothing in statute that says you have to use a specific tool or you have to notify your community of the tool. It just says you have to do the evaluation.
Yeah, I think our community is used to our transparency. So I think showing, having a few slides that really show the tool and kind of the direction that we're all going here, I think is probably that, and getting our regular schedule for the rest of the year. I think that's probably going to be good. And then should the governing board want to matriculate to another conversation about a board self-evaluation, and that's going to be a more dense conversation. Carmen, that might be something that we would do shortly thereafter as a February board retreat.
Right. Well, our meeting is live streamed in public today. I'm fine with, just kind of generalizing this tool so that way it's prepared for, I guess, what the timeline looks for January. If we're not going to be doing anything in between, we could definitely be working on this tool to then give. Actually, where would it go? Would it go to ASBA if we use it? What does that look like when we're done with it? How we get it? What does that look like?
I think to Julie's point, there's a summary page. And the summary page, Julie, correct me if I'm wrong, would go into my personnel jacket. Should somebody FOIA the superintendent's evaluation.
Right. But we don't take the tool back and summarize or any of those things. We recommend that board members do the tool, the superintendent does a self-evaluation. You all bring it to a meeting, discuss it. Then when you're done, whatever you provide to the superintendent as the final evaluation is what would be.
Okay, I've heard different things like where
Yeah.
board secretaries do it or.
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes the board like in some districts, board members send it to the board president, which we are a little concerned about in terms of open meeting law. So, we're just recommending that each board member come prepared to the executive session to have a conversation.
Right. Well, to the rest, I mean, we have 5 minutes left, but is there any thoughts on if we just kind of go with this and then come prepared for January 27th? Since we all have a tangible copy here with us to bring information from. I see Mr.
I think
Vicky.
that's the plan.
Okay. All right, team. I mean, really glad we did this. It just brings a lot of structure. I know I say that all the time, but without it, I feel like we don't see really how good things really are. So I'm really excited about it. Thank you very much, Ms. Julie, for your time and for answering all of our questions. I'm sure Dr. Diaz was mailed one, but is there any maybe follow-up we could have her call you for questions or something like that?
Yeah, anytime. I'm 100% available, free of charge to the board for anything that you need during the pilot period.
Got it. Would there be an electronic version to fill out, or should we just kind of scan and handwrite in this little guy?
No electronic version as yet.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
All right, guys. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it. Hope you have a good rest of your day. We'll see you
You
all.
have to adjourn the meeting.
Oh, yeah. Duh. All in favor of adjourning the meeting at 11:55, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say nay. With that, the motion passes and we'll adjourn at 11:56. Thank you all
Have a good
very,
evening.
very much.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.